On the subject of classical philosophy, it's very difficult for us to say anything with absolute certainty, even about the greatest of philosophers. Socrates, for example, is known to us through the writings of others, especially his disciple Plato. Plato, of course, was not just a former student of Socrates, but a major figure in the history of philosophy, so we tend to take what he wrote quite seriously. We also know a bit about Socrates from the historian Xenophon and from the playwright Aristophanes, who composed satirical plays. This is what philosophers call the Socratic problem, that the real Socrates can never truly be known and may only be seen through the eyes of others. So this is what we think we know about Socrates. He was born in Athens to a lower middle-class household around 469 BCE. His father was apparently a stonemason, and in his early years, Socrates followed him into this very hands-on profession. Socrates was married to a woman named Xanthippe, who is known to history as the angry wife. Why was she so angry? Well, given that Socrates spent most of his adult life teaching philosophy and refusing to accept money from his students, a destitute Xanthippe may have had good reason to complain. As for Socrates, he said, "By all means, marry. If you get a good wife, you'll become happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher." Now keep in mind that Socrates was not the first philosopher in Athens. So what was Athenian philosophy like when Socrates came on the scene in the 5th century BCE? Well, this was the time of the sophists. Philosophers, yes, but in the end, they were professional teachers who charged a healthy fee for their services. To acquire as much wealth as they could, the sophists were accused of catering to the upper class, teaching arete, or manly virtue or excellence, to the sons of noblemen. And for that reason, Socrates mocked the sophists relentlessly in public. I mean, he despised them. So, of course, they hated him right back. You might say that Socrates was very good at making enemies, and not just of the sophists. The reasons for his arrests, trial, and eventual execution are many and varied, but in the tumultuous years following the Peloponnesian War, Socrates made an absolute nuisance of himself. Keep in mind, Athens was the birthplace of democracy, right? Something that I think most of us today appreciate having. So what did Socrates do? He criticized democracy, of course. He questioned the merits of democracy as marginalizing the needs of the minority. And where's the justice in that? Might makes right was a popular Athenian credo, which Socrates often repudiated as lacking any sense of moral justice. A popular explanation for Socrates' downfall is that when his friend, Chaerephon, asked the oracle at Delphi if there was any man wiser than Socrates, the oracle replied that there was not. Socrates himself was perplexed by this, since he did not consider himself to be wise at all. He decided to test her statements by interviewing the most renowned statesmen and intellectuals of Athens to see who among them was the wisest. But all these men did was point the finger at themselves, which brought Socrates to a paradoxical conclusion. "I know that I am intelligent because I know that I know nothing," he is famous for saying. And in admitting his lack of wisdom, Socrates proved that he was indeed the wisest of men. This did not sit well with the elite of Athens. He was arrested and tried for crimes against the state, including corrupting the youth of Athens. Socrates chose to defend himself. Plato's transcription of this defense would become known as the Apology of Socrates, and it is one of the documents through which Socratic philosophy is best understood. In spite of his eloquent and thoroughly unapologetic defense, Socrates was convicted and sentenced to die. Plato and his other disciples bribed the guards and offered to spirit Socrates away to escape and live out his days on a secluded island, but Socrates refused. He didn't want to become a fugitive. He had lived by Athenian law, and he would die by it. And so he was forced to drink hemlock a slow and agonizing poison. He died in Plato's arms. The philosophy of Socrates is all about gnothi pseudon, know thyself. He believed that humans were merely animals with a psyche, a word which in this context can be translated as mind or soul. The more one suppresses the animal and elevates the psyche through education and knowledge, the more perfectly human one becomes. Ignorance is the mother of all evil, Socrates is often quoted as saying. At first, this may seem paradoxical to the wisdom of knowing nothing, but such is not the case. To know what one does and does not know is wisdom. To proclaim one knows what one does not actually know is ignorance. The Socratic method is designed to help a student discover what he does and does not know, and it is arguably Socrates' greatest contribution to Western thought. The idea is simple, though the implications are far-reaching. Through asking and answering questions, speakers are forced to define and redefine their arguments, to think critically, and to come to their own conclusions. The teacher feigns ignorance in order to force his students to try to explain what they think they know. The Socratic method is thus a form of assisted self-discovery. The teacher does not in fact teach at all, but helps the student discover his own knowledge or lack thereof. In the moral philosophy of Socrates are sown the first seeds of what would come to be known as civic humanism. You see, Socrates agreed that to be moral is to have arete. Morality is about duty, fulfilling one's social function. In Socrates' view, it is better to do nothing at all than to imperfectly fulfill one's social function. You might say that Socrates was a selective perfectionist. It's better to do nothing than to do something poorly. A man can achieve perfection because he can choose what things to do perfectly and what things not to attempt at all.